Good afternoon. My name is Alicja Wójcik, and I am very much pleased to welcome you to another international educational conference, which is held every 2 years by International Center for Education about Auschwitz and the Holocaust at Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. The main language of the conference is English, but simultaneous translation into Polish will be provided during almost the entire conference. During presentations and lectures in Polish, of course, the translation into English will be provided. If you did not take the translation equipment during entering our conference room, please raise your hands so that our volunteers will be able to provide you with the headsets. This year, during this 3 days event, in a group of more than 100 specialists and experts in the fields of education, memory, and social history research, we will listen together to presentation from nearly 30 specialists and speakers from around the world. We do hope that our conference will be a good opportunity to have a fruitful debates and become a chance to exchange our experiences and maybe even start new cooperation. The title of this year's conference is Remember, is memory enough in the 21st century? In the discussion about memory, the voice of survivors is significant. They are the best ambassadors for memory. And especially now, 80 years after the war, at the time of unstableness and crisis in which the world finds itself, their perception of memory and its importance is the voice we seek. Let us then listen to their words.
It's been almost 100 years since I experienced and the Jewish population experienced these horrors, and it's fading in the memory of people. It's superseded by other events in the world, but Auschwitz is a unique experience in the Western world, and so I think it has to be remembered.
Ich sage auch immer in der Schule, damit sie davon lernen, was es passiert war, dass es kann immer wieder passieren. Hellwach sein, nicht schweigen, wenn sie Ungerechtigkeit erfahren, entgegenzutreten, nicht schweigen, weil wir dürfen es niemals vergessen.
Bo przecież w rękach młodych ludzi jest przyszłość tego świata. Dlatego przy każdym spotkaniu, które odbywam dosyć często z młodymi, mówię, że w waszych rękach jest przyszłość tego świata. I od was zależy, jaki on będzie. Żebyście nie dopuścili jednak do tego, żeby to, co się w Auschwitz-Birkenau wydarzyło, mogło się jeszcze powtórzyć.
To znaczy, że ja żyję i to jest fajne. I żeby ludzie doceniali, bo naprawdę to, co teraz, jeżeli nie opamiętają się, to nic dobrego nie czeka się nikogo. Właściwie nikogo. To nie jest tak, że jedni są mądrzejsi, to oni zwyciężą, a ci głupsi nie. Nie, teraz nie będzie zwycięzcy. Teraz tylko, jeżeli będzie, to tylko będą przegrani.
Das, was passiert ist, muss irgendwie wieder auftauchen und sagen, wenn wir so leben, wie wir leben, mit Kriegen und undemokratischen Parteien und schweren Zeiten.
To jest nieważne, czy jest jakiś kolor skóry, czy jest wyznanie, religia. To nie ma znaczenia, to jest człowiek.
I do tego człowieka trzeba podchodzić tak samo, jakby się do siebie podchodziło. I dopóki tego nie osiągniemy, to boję się, że będą konflikty, będą problemy.
Jest mi trochę trudniej, bo ja to wszystko przeżywam. Na nowo myślę, zła jestem, że tak się życie ułożyło, no ale wojna, że to wszystko wojna spowodowała. I ostrzegać młodych właśnie, żeby szanowali siebie. Żeby siebie szanowali, żeby jeden do drugiego miał ten szacunek.
Że musimy jako ludzie myślący, chcący dobrze dla ludzkości, kiedyś skończyć z tą spiralą zła. Wzajemne zarzuty. Tyś mi to zrobił, a ja ci odpłaciłem, odwet był taki. I to idzie, ta spirala. Kiedyś trzeba jako myślący ludzie, zdrowy rozsądek ten zakończyć z tym.
Myśleć, pamiętać o przyszłości tragicznej, ale nie zapiekać się w nienawiści do innych ludzi, inaczej myślących, inaczej mówiących. Pozytywnie patrzeć na świat. To bardzo trudne, ale tak trzeba. Nie ma innego wyjścia.
Chcę zwrócić uwagę na tekst. Tekst niesłychanie inspirujący. Tekst, którego autorem jest rabi Nachman z Bratysławia, ale znany bardziej jako rabi Nachman z Humania, ponieważ tam kazał się pochować między grobami ofiar pogromu. Kol ha'ulam kulo. Cały nasz świat, nasz świat. Gesher car מאוד jest niczym bardzo wąski pomost. Wyhajikar, a co najważniejsze, lo lefachet klal, nie bać się wcale.
Pamięć zanika. Minęło już prawie 100 lat.
Memory fades. Almost 100 years have passed, but what happened must see the light of day again.
Nie wolno nam milczeć.
We must not remain
Gdy dzieje
silent
się niesprawiedliwość.
when injustice occurs.
Nie będzie zwycięzców.
There will be no winners.
Będą tylko przegrani.
There will be only
Jeśli nie
losers
zareagujemy.
if we do not react.
Musimy, jako myślący ludzie,
We, as thinking
przerwać spiralę
people, must
nienawiści.
break the spiral of hatred,
Bo w waszych rękach
because
jest
the
przyszły
future of the world is in your hands.
nie bójmy się
So let's not be afraid,
i próbujmy
and
Mimo
let us
wszystko,
try, despite
pozytywnie
everything,
patrzeć na świat.
to look at the world
bardzo
positively,
trudne.
even though it is difficult.
Zacytowałem
I have just
ocalonych.
quoted the words of the victims, of the survivors
Szanowni
from
Państwo,
the
drodzy
videos
goście,
that you could see.
uczestniczki i
Ladies and
uczestnicy
gentlemen,
Międzynarodowej
dear guests,
Konferencji
participants of
Edukacyjnej.
this international educational
Nazywam się
conference.
Andrzej Kacorzy,
My
jestem
name is
zastępcą
Andrzej
dyrektora
Kacorzy and I'm
Muzeum
the duty
Auschwitz
head of the
i osobą
Auschwitz Museum
odpowiedzialną za
and the person
Międzynarodowe
responsible
Centrum
for this
Edukacji o
International
Auschwitz i
Center
Holokauście.
for Education about Auschwitz and the
To dla mnie
Holocaust.
zaszczyt powitać
It is
Państwa
an
w tym
honor
miejscu,
for me to
zarówno
welcome
w
you
muzeum,
here,
w
both
miejscu
at the
pamięci
Auschwitz-Birkenau
jak
Museum
i w
and
naszym
Memorial
centrum
and at our
edukacyjnym.
educational center.
Z głęboką wdzięcznością
With deep gratitude,
dziękuję Państwu
I
za
want to
przyjęcie
thank you for
zaproszenia.
accepting the invitation.
Ekspertki, eksperci z całego
Experts
świata
from all
są
over the
dziś
world
z nami.
are with us
To
today,
wyraz wspólnej
which is an
odpowiedzialności
expression
za
of
pamięć,
our
edukację
shared
i
responsibility
przyszłość.
for the memory, education, and
Profesor
future.
Władysław Bartoszewski
Professor
ocalał
Władysław
z
Bartoszewski, a
20
survivor
lat
of
temu
Auschwitz,
podczas 60. rocznicy
20 years ago,
wyzwolenia
during the
obozu,
16th
ogłosił
anniversary of the
powstanie
liberation of the camp,
Międzynarodowego Centrum
announced the
Edukacji.
establishment of the International
Powiedział
Education
wtedy,
Center.
że on
He said
i
then that
inni
he
ocalali
and other
zrobili
survivors
wiele,
had done
by
a
zachować
lot
pamięć.
to preserve the
Ale
memory,
nie dość.
but not enough.
Dlatego apelował, by
That is why
edukacja w
he
tym
appealed
miejscu
for
nabrała
education in
nowego,
this
głębszego
place
wymiaru.
to take on a new,
Wymiaru,
deeper
który
dimension,
odpowiada
a
wyzwaniom
dimension
XXI
that
wieku.
responds to the challenges of the
Wtedy
21st century.
Zrozumieliśmy to tak, że
Then we
odpowiedzialność za przekazywanie
understood that the
pamięci
responsibility
coraz
for
bardziej
passing on
przychodzi na
memory
nas,
is increasingly passing to
powojenne
us,
pokolenie.
the post-war
Pełna
generations.
nazwa naszego
The
centrum,
full name of our center,
Międzynarodowe
International
Centrum
Center
Edukacji
for
o
Education
Auschwitz i
on
Holokauście,
Auschwitz and the
zawiera w
Holocaust,
sobie to,
encompasses
czym jesteśmy
what
i
we
co
are
chcemy
and what we
wyrażać.
want to
Jesteśmy
wish and to
międzynarodowi,
express.
bo do naszych programów
We
dołączają
are
ludzie
international
z
because
całego
people from
świata.
all over the world join
Nasz
our
zespół
programs, and our
tworzą
team
osoby
is
z
made
wielu
of
krajów oraz
people
różnych
from
kultur i
many
języków.
countries and different cultures and
głosy
languages. We listen to
z
the
całą
voices of the
uwagą.
whole world with attention.
Jesteśmy centrum, miejscem
We are
spotkań,
the
dialogu,
center,
refleksji,
a
działania.
place of meetings,
To stąd
dialogue,
rozciąga się
reflection, and
widok
action. From
zarówno
here, you
na
can
były
see
obóz
both
Auschwitz,
the former
jak i na
Auschwitz camp
współczesny
and the
świat.
contemporary world.
Wierzymy,
We
że
believe
właśnie tu
that
powinny
this
rodzić
is
się
where
pytania i
questions
pomysły,
and
jak
ideas
mierzyć
should
się z
arise
nienawiścią,
about how to
której echo
confront the
wciąż brzmi
hatred
wokół nas.
that still echoes around us.
Jesteśmy edukacją,
We are
ponieważ
education
pomagamy ludziom
because
w
we
osobistym
help people
spotkaniu
to
z
personally
historią
meet the
Auschwitz i
history of
Shoah.
Auschwitz and Shoah.
To spotkanie zmienia
This meeting
nie tylko
changes
rozumienie przeszłości,
not only
ale i
understanding the
spojrzenie na
past, but
teraźniejszość.
the view of the present.
Centrum jest
The
owocem
center
pracy
is the
wielu
fruit of
pokoleń.
the work of many generations,
którzy od
of
początku
those
byli w
who
Muzeum
were at
Auschwitz
the Auschwitz Museum
i
from
tych,
the very
którzy
beginning,
przyszli po nich.
and those who came
Edukacja w
after them.
Auschwitz nie
Education
zaczęła
at
się 20
Auschwitz
lat
did
temu,
not begin
ale to
20
właśnie
years ago,
wtedy
but it was
ocalali
then
przekazali
that the
nam
survivors
symboliczną
passed us the
pałeczkę w
symbolic
sztafecie pokoleń.
baton in the relay of generations.
Jeszcze nie tak dawno
Not so long ago,
ocalali prowadzili grupy
survivors led
odwiedzających
groups of visitors
przez teren byłego
through the
obozu.
former camp.
Ich głosy były
Their voices
częścią naszego
were part of
codziennego
our
działania.
daily activities.
Przedwczoraj
The
miałem
day
wyjątkową
before
okazję,
yesterday,
przeszedłem
I went
przez
through
Birkenau
Birkenau
z panią Elżbietą
with
Sobczyńską,
Ms. Elżbieta
która została
Sobczyńska,
deportowana do
who was
Auschwitz
deported
jako
to Auschwitz
10-letnie
as a
dziecko w
10-year-old
sierpniu
child in
1944
August
roku.
1944.
Towarzyszyła jej rodzina.
She was accompanied
Dzieci,
by her family,
wnuki,
children, grandchildren.
niej
They
mamo,
called her mom,
babciu,
grandma,
ciociu,
auntie,
Elu.
Ella.
To takie wyjątkowa
You know,
grupa.
a very unique group, right?
Opowiedziała nam o
She
chwili,
told
kiedy
us about the moment
będąc w obozie przedostawała
when she
się
was
ze
getting to the
szpitala-
camp
przedostawała
hospital,
się do szpitala obozowego, do rewiru,
you know,
gdzie leżała jej
where
matka.
her mother was lying.
Po drodze
On the way,
strach,
she felt
widok,
fear.
miała
No, she was
sterty
terrified.
martwych ciał.
She could see piles of human bodies, dead bodies.
Była przerażona.
She was scared, she
pragnienie
was terrified,
przytulenia
but
się
the
do mamy
desire to
zwyciężyło.
hug to her mother
Kiedy matka,
won
choć sama
when her
słaba,
mother, although
wzięła ją
weak
na kolana,
herself, took her
w
on
Elżbiecie
her lap,
zrodziło się jakieś
and
wewnętrzne
then
przekonanie,
she had this
jakieś
inner
zdanie,
emotions,
nie wie do
like a
końca,
sentence,
dlaczego
you know,
właśnie
she
wtedy,
doesn't really
które
know exactly
nosi w
why
sobie do dziś.
at that time, but she carries
Jesteś
this
zdana
till this
tylko
day.
na siebie.
You are on your own.
Musisz pomóc
You
sobie
have to
sama.
help yourself.
Nikt ci nie
No
pomoże.
one will help you.
Zeskoczyła z kolan.
So she
I pomimo
jumped down from her
ogromnego
knees,
strachu,
and
strasznego
despite the
widoku
fear,
sterty
this
trupów,
terrible sight of
wróciła do swojego
piles of
baraku.
corpses, she returned
To
to
doświadczenie,
her
jak
barracks.
mówi,
And this experience, as
ukształtowało
she's
całe jej
saying,
życie.
shaped her whole life.
I my dzisiaj tak
And
naprawdę
today,
codziennie
we
zeskakujemy z
have
kolan.
to jump off our knees.
Nie możemy patrzeć
We
bezradnie,
cannot
co
watch
zrobią inni.
helplessly what others will
Nie
do.
możemy czekać,
We
aż
cannot
ktoś nas
wait for
ochroni.
someone else to
To nasz
protect
czas.
us. This is
Czas
our
na
time,
refleksję,
time
czas
for
na
reflection,
budowanie
time for
wspólnych
building
planów,
common
ale
plans,
przede wszystkim
but
czas na
above all,
aktywne działanie.
time for active action.
Dziękuję Państwu.
Thank you,
Życzę
ladies
nam
and gentlemen.
wszystkim
I
odwagi w
wish
myśleniu,
all of us courage in thinking,
odpowiedzialności w
responsibility in
działaniu i
acting,
nadziei,
and
która
hope that
nigdy nie
never
umiera.
dies.
Zapraszam
Now, I would
doktora
like to
Piotra
invite Dr.
Cywińskiego,
Piotr
opiekuna
Cywiński,
miejsca
the guardian
pamięci,
of the memorial
dyrektora
site, the
Muzeum
director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum.
Yes, please keep your headphones. I will continue in Polish. It will be much more easier. No jest mi niezmiernie miło Państwa
I have an honor and the pleasure to actually open this conference,
która no, ma miejsce
which
w
takes
trudnych
place
czasach,
in difficult times,
bardzo trudnych czasach.
very difficult times.
Chyba wszyscy to
We all
odczuwamy,
are aware of that and we all feel it.
że świat się
We
robi
feel that the world
coraz bardziej złożony,
is becoming more and more
coraz bardziej
complex,
populistyczny,
more and
coraz
more
mniej
populistic,
przewidywalny.
less and less
coraz
predictable,
brutalniejszy,
and more brutal.
No, dla osób, które
For
zawodowo
those
się zajmują
who
pamięcią, to
deal
są
with memory professionally, these are the challenges
trudne
that
do
are very
zniesienia.
hard to burden,
Stąd chcieliśmy się
to carry. That
w
is
tym roku
why
zastanowić,
this year we wanted to think
czy ta pamięć,
and
którą
discuss this
tworzymy,
memory, the memory that we
utrzymujemy,
create, that
którą
we
rozwijamy,
preserve,
którą
that we
próbujemy
develop,
budować,
that
czy
we
to
try
jest
to build.
jakiś taki
You want to
metoda
check or
jakby
discuss whether
samoistna,
this is a kind of method and
czy
like
jednak
spontaneous
należy ją
method, or
obudować
perhaps we
jakimiś
should
innymi jeszcze, być może elementami
add
pracy
some
z
additional
kolejnymi pokoleniami.
element when thinking about work with other
Pamięć, która
generations. And this is the
w ogóle
memory
stwarza
that
wszystkim
somehow
problemy, bo nawet tak naprawdę
causes
nie ma jednej
different
dobrej
problems. There's
definicji
no
pamięci.
one
Wszyscy
good
używamy tego
definitions
słowa
of
troszeczkę
memory.
tak
We use this
fenomenologicznie,
word
tak,
very phenomenologically, which means that
trochę tak na czuja jakby,
we somehow try to sense this definition, right?
operując tym pojęciem.
When using this term,
Wiemy
memory,
dobrze, że pamięć
however,
to
we
nie
know
jest
that
to samo,
memory
co
is
wiedza
not the
historyczna,
same as historical
odczuwamy.
knowledge, right? We can sense
Wiedzę
it somehow.
historyczną
Well,
potrafimy
historical
uczyć w
knowledge,
szkołach,
we can
uczyć
actually teach it
pamięci.
in schools. We can teach
Dużo,
memory.
dużo
Well, it's really
mniej.
difficult. It's actually more
Dla mnie
difficult to teach memory.
Pamięć jest
So for me,
czymś
memory
bardzo bliskim
is
pojęciu
something very
doświadczenia.
close to experience. Memory and
Pojęciu
experience.
Doświadczenie rozumianym nie
I mean,
tylko doświadczenie
experience
własne, to
understood
może
not
być
only my own experience,
doświadczenie
right?
nabyte,
It might be also
przekazane.
passed by, it may be
wydaje mi się,
passed
że te dwa
on,
słowa
sorry.
są
So these two
wyjątkowo
words
bliskie
are exceptional close to one another,
sobie.
to each other, and I think they are similar.
Tymczasem o doświadczeniu mówimy
When
generalnie
talking
w sposób
about
bardzo
experience, we
pozytywny.
usually
To
use
coś, co
positive words.
otwiera
We
klapki,
use words that will
co
open
rozszerza
your
pewnej
eyes
zdolności
or
podejmowania
your
decyzji,
ability to make
pewne,
decisions
umiejętności oceny
or skills
sytuacji
to
i tak
evaluate
dalej.
assess the situation that is
Natomiast
going on.
nawet sam język,
But even the
którym mówimy o
language
pamięci,
itself,
jest
when talking
nacechowany
about the
bardzo,
memory, well, this language
może nie negatywnie,
has not
ale
perhaps
nie
negative
jest łatwy
sense, but it's really
w
hard
odbiorze. No,
to
mówimy o
perceive
konieczności
because we're talking
pamięci,
about, you know, the need
pracy nad pamięcią,
to have a memory or have
o
to work on
przepracowaniu
memory,
tej
have to work
pamięci,
through
o
memory.
obowiązku
We're talking
tej
about it
pamięci.
as an
Znaczy,
obligation, as a duty,
wszystkie te
right?
słowa,
So all
praca,
these words like
obowiązek,
work, obligation,
konieczność, nie
duty,
wiem,
need,
no, kojarzą się
they
po prostu
somehow
fatalnie.
are
16
kind
czy
of negative,
17
especially
lat
when
się
you are
tutaj
16, 17 years old and you come here for the first time and visit the place and you hear about these duties, obligations, work, then it is not really encouraging, right? It sounds at least like doing your homework, like a lesson, right? However, memory is important. And so we cannot really speak about memory in positive categories, in positive terms, you know, to empower a human being, right? Or to motivate a person, to change their consciousness, awareness, giving them this tool and support them in these decisions that they make. However, despite this, we tend to use these negative terms, negative words, negative terminology. And even our celebrations, right? I'm talking our because I have participated in different meetings all over the world. And all these meetings, these conferences, they are sort of kind of paramilitary-like, because there are like rows of people standing orders, there's like this choreography that they create for the ceremony. Of course, ceremonies, memorizing, such events, they go back to kind of military or armed forces ceremonies. Yes, because we want to remember about this, dead people. But the question is, this ceremony, this expression, visual expression, public expression of this memory, should it be or must it be military-like, or perhaps not, because it's about civilians as well, right? Not only about soldiers, it's about civilians. So they take part in this event. So what is the goal of this memory, understood as something close to experience, right? Well, it seems to me that a lot of people, the public opinion, decision makers, they hope that people dealing with memory will give some responses to what people should do today. And we all feel this pressure that when working on memory, we should give answers. However, it is hard for us to answer that, right? It's not possible. We can at least ask difficult questions and not giving answers, right? So I believe that this very famous quote, Liesel, from my memory, in each question actually has a power, and it's really hard to look for answers. We don't know when this answer will be needed. First of all, it might be tomorrow, it might be in 10 years' time. And a person that comes and agrees to develop this memory, perhaps in some, for a future, will need these questions. In a situation that we cannot imagine today. We don't know what will happen in 3 months' time with this pace of craziness that's going on in the whole world. What about 10 years' time? We don't know what this person will be confronting with, right? What will be the challenges, problems, possibilities, threats, and so on and so forth. It seems that memory, despite all those who are looking for reasons to, to be proud, which I never understood, memory should, let's say, give questions, provide questions to myself, first of all. And these questions will be very hard without exact answers or obvious answers. And then this is a memory that will grow, that will cause this moral anxiety or uncertainty about my place, what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, about what I'm worried about, what I'm concerned about, what I don't care about my whole engagement and the sense, of course, the sense of my life. And then this memory may change something, may give you some ideas, may empower, may justify certain decisions. And this memory about extermination camps, this terror, Nazi terror, well, we have been teaching this for so many decades. In the majority of our curricula, school curricula, at least in the western part of the world, which is an obvious part of the curricula. And in the meantime, this world is going in the very uncertain directions and worrying directions, that's what I would say. So during this next 3 days, we would like to think about it together, and whether this memory looks the way it should, or perhaps we should empower it with something else, or perhaps maybe change the methods of working with this memory, or perhaps add some elements to it so that it is easier for people
przekroczyć przez
to
te dosyć normalne progi jakby czystych emocji,
emotions like empathy, but also judgment, right? Different emotion. This is what the historical knowledge is enough, and we want to achieve this moment when these people will start to feel this uncertainty, moral uncertainty coming from the memory itself. So I wish all of us these discussions, fruitful discussions, which, well, this is, I think, the next, I think, 5th conference. So I would like to say a huge thank you to every one of you that you decided to participate, to come and participate in this conference and discuss these challenges with us. And let me also thank to those who actually took part in organizing this conference. I hope that it will be a good time for all of us. Not easy time, but good time for all of us. Thank you very much.
We will inaugurate this year's conference with a lecture by Professor Bernd Simon. The title of his lecture is Evolution of Intolerance, Prejudice and Discrimination in the 21st Century. Professor Simon, I invite you on the stage.
Sorry, it's going too fast. How can I go back? Here we are. So, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to come here, and for your hospitality. I'm very impressed, particularly by your punctuality. I always try to be very counter-stereotypic, and I think I succeeded in that. I don't know, actually, to be honest to you, whether I can contribute much to answering the leading question, is memory enough in the 21st century? All I can do is offer, in humble modesty, some social psychological insights to you. And my hope is that these insights, memory, and experiences will be mutually supportive. I can also apply the same question that gives the motto of this conference to tolerance. So that it would be, is tolerance enough? And here I have to say, I don't know. But I certainly assume it is necessary. And actually, I do think it is already quite something if we achieve tolerance. In fact, in many ways, my mission over the last years has been to rehabilitate the concept and the practice of tolerance. So before I start with my actual presentation and my talk, a warning. It also will help to put my talk into a broader context. So I will talk much about social categorization now. And actually, our morning tour showed us, or we could learn much about the cruel and the deadly, the inhumane effects of social categorization, of putting people into categories. And it was very engaging, and very emotionally very engaging. But what I will do now is actually, I will take a somewhat different attitude. And if you wish, I will take a cooler attitude. In terms of Norbert Elias, what I will do, I will take the attitude not of an engaged activist, but more of a distanced or self-distancing analyst. So, and I hope you will bear with me. Well, tolerance is a popular and a loaded word, not only in everyday social and political talk, but also in the discourses of various academic disciplines. While tolerance is widely acknowledged as a prerequisite for peaceful coexistence in society and of societies, there is much controversy in academia and beyond around the exact meaning of tolerance and around the respective conceptual, normative, practical, social, and political implications. So in particular, tolerance has been praised and defended as a virtue of justice, for example, by Rainer Forst, as a demand of reason, a fundamental liberal and democratic value, but it has also been described as an elusive virtue by David Haidt, for example, or even criticized as a repressive vice by Herbert Marcuse and Wendy Brown. So this complexity testifies to the difficulty of tolerance as a contested interpretive concept, which not only allows, but actually calls for a compelling conception in order to get it right. And here's my proposal, how to get it right. Or in other words, how to take tolerance seriously. My starting point is the seminal insight of the philosopher Tim Scanlon, who suggested that tolerance is intermediate between wholehearted acceptance and unrestrained opposition. Tolerance requires us to accept people and permit their practices, even when we strongly disapprove of them. So, a first component of the conception of tolerance that I'd like to argue here today is disapproval. So disapproval as a definitional condition of tolerance. Whereas when we are in a situation where no disapproval exists, we don't need tolerance. If we already approve of other people's beliefs, practices, ways of life, tolerance is not necessary. But as soon as we disapprove of something, there's the challenge. So if disapproval is the definitional condition of tolerance, then we also need a counterweight. And here I borrow a suggestion from the philosopher Rainer Forst. I suggest that respect for others as equals operates as such a counterweight or a restraining force, and thus makes tolerance possible. So I offer two short formulas, which are equivalent though, two short formulas of tolerance. So I suggest to understand tolerance as disapproval restrained by respect, or viewed from a complementary perspective as respect burdened with disapproval. Burdened with disapproval, but not torn apart by disapproval. Now, where do disapproval and respect come from, social psychology speaking? And here I will now turn to the social psychological or social categorical origin of disapproval and respect. And I will present three fundamental social psychological insights or contributions on which our conception of tolerance is built. The first insight is the experience of value, of what is good, is bound up with the experience of collective identity, such that what represents us and ours is evaluated as good, and what represents them and theirs is evaluated as bad. So wherever the self, the collective self is, where the place of the self, the collective self is, that's the place where it is good. That's where the place is of truth, social psychologically speaking. That's the side of the light, if you wish. And wherever we see them and theirs, that's the place of falsehood. That's where things are wrong, where things are bad, and where things are ugly, and it even smells bad. Second major insight, common group membership, shared collective identity, leads to the accentuation of intra-group similarities and is therefore a source of respect. Respect now understood as equality recognition in terms of Axel Honneth, for example. So we see each other as equals when we share an identity or share a group membership. And by seeing each other as equals, we see each other as entitled to the treatment as equals, and we feel obligated to treat each other as equals. However, of course, the implication is that the boundaries, the group boundaries, are also boundaries of respect. So while we respect each other within our group, as soon as we go beyond our group, cross the boundaries to them, then we don't respect. We don't feel the same respect, if we feel any respect at all. Third insight, collective identity at a given level of in-group, out-group categorization, and from now on I call this level 1, is typically embedded in a higher level superordinate collective identity. Call it level 2. So that more inclusive respect for others as equals is possible now. So what is possible now is respect across level 1 group boundaries as soon as a higher order superordinate in-group comes into view. Here again, the first insight. So the psychological union of identity and value, as I said before, where we are, that's where the good side is. Yeah, right? That's where truth is, that's where beauty is, that's where the right and the good is placed. Whereas where they are, that's the realm of disapproval. There's falsehood, they are wrong, they are ugly, and I said, they even smell bad. Now, when we add level 2 to this level 1 categorization, then respect is possible also for the others. So now we have a more inclusive identity, and respect goes beyond the limit, beyond the boundary of level 1 categorization. And that now brings me to our full dual level model of tolerance as we understand it, the disapproval respect model of tolerance. So what you see here again, the level 1, in-group, out-group categorization, us versus them. Level 2, to the extent that there is a superordinate in-group, superordinate identity, respect is more inclusive, equality recognition is more inclusive. And to the extent, and this is now the critical point, to the extent that such level 2 respect comes into play, tolerance is possible. So to the extent that level 2 respect restrains, tames, pacifies, civilizes, level 1 disapproval, tolerance ensues. That's the main hypothesis. And there is a third short formula then for tolerance. Oh, well, here is another, before I come to the third formula, there's another way to present the model, pretty much the same, but what you can see here maybe more clearly is wherever you start, when you start from level 1, disapproval, and disapproval is restrained by respect, we should come to tolerance. Or if we start from level 2, respect, and respect is burdened with disapproval, we should come to tolerance. Tolerance should be possible. So that actually illustrates the two short formulas, either respect burdened with disapproval or disapproval restrained by respect. So these are the complementary viewpoints, but both are basically equivalent short formulas for tolerance. But the third that I indicated before, the third short formula is tolerance can be understood as the recognition of disapproved others as different equals. So different equals, sorry, I'm not here familiar with this, I always press the wrong button. So different equal now means different owing to people's membership in a particular, say, cultural, ethnic, religious, or ideological outgroup, but equal owing to shared membership in a superordinate in-group, like the same political community or society or even humanity as a whole. So humanity as a whole would be the most universalized, or would be the universalized level 2. Now, with this conception of tolerance in mind, we can very clearly differentiate tolerance from intolerance. So, according to this model, attitudes or acts of disapproval at level 1 that are restrained by respect for others as equals, level 2, constitute the realm of tolerance. So, for example, you can disapprove of socialist ideas, but not restrict socialists' freedom of speech. That would be an example for tolerance in that the disapproval of socialist ideas is restrained by respect for socialists' right to freedom of speech. attitudes or acts of unrestrained disapproval, which deny others the respect as equals, are clearly outside the realm of tolerance and constitute the realm of intolerance. So, as an example, disapproval of homosexuality and the refusal to employ a gay person as a school teacher. That would be a clear case of unrestrained disapproval and clear case of intolerance. Thus, when we deny disapproved others the respect as different equals, we cross the line that demarcates the border between tolerance and intolerance. So I want to give you a few reference for those who want later maybe read and critically examine what we've done so far. I would claim that so far there is very good empirical evidence in support of our model, and the body of evidence is actually growing. Just to give you a brief overview. So we have done research with a variety of groups, including religious groups like Muslims, political groups like supporters of the Tea Party movement in the United States, but also, of course, with ordinary university students, usually with a center-left political orientation. And we also used a number of different methods, like cross-sectional data we collected, that means one-time measurement, but we also used repeated measurements, so we used longitudinal surveys. So we asked a question at one point of time, and then a month or half a year later, we remeasured people's attitudes and then examined the interrelationships. We also conducted experiments in order to get closer to the causal question, whether respect really can be considered a cause rather than just a correlate of tolerance. So what we found, a few highlights: respect for members of disapproved outgroups was generally in our research predictive of tolerance toward outgroups. And here is a nice meta-analytic integration of a rather big number of studies that actually supported that critical outgroup respect tolerance hypothesis. And what I also found very illuminating is that the critical doubly extreme combination of the utmost outgroup disapproval, so the respondents who were clearly disapproved of the outgroup, but at the same time showed full outgroup respect. That combination turned out to be an empirical reality, not just a theoretical fiction. An empirical reality, admittedly, with room for further improvement. But for example, of those research participants in the study by Simon and Schäfer, here, we found that of those participants who showed utmost outgroup disapproval, at least 20% nevertheless indicated full outgroup respect, and they showed clear tolerance toward most outgroups. So you might have asked yourself before, well, isn't that a possibility at all that people can strongly disapprove of others, but at the same time show full respect? Empirically speaking, yes, it is possible. This critical cell was not empty. Of course, as I said, there's room for improvement, but it's possible that people can hold, so to speak, both attitudes, an attitude of disapproval and an attitude of respect at the same time. And that combination seems to be the combination that makes tolerance possible. Using a longitudinal research design, we were able to demonstrate that when people have respect for disapproved outgroups, they will develop more tolerance toward that group over time. So in that research, we secured evidence that respect and tolerance are not simply the same thing or just two sides of the same coin. In fact, our results suggest that respect is a causal antecedent of tolerance, because we observe that respect, and we will see it later in the chart, respect at time 1 predicts tolerance at time 2, but not vice versa. And we further substantiated the causal role of respect using the experimental method, and here we also had developed a comprehensive multi-item measure of tolerance. And the experiment demonstrated, that's actually a study here, study 2 of this, presented in this paper. A multi-item measure of tolerance, and we used in that, and the experiment demonstrated that the outgroup respect-tolerance link holds in the public, in the civic political sphere, and is not just confined to tolerance for what people may do in private. So the experiment was concerned with political groups, whether they were allowed to speak in public, or at the university and campus, whether they were allowed to meet at the university, they were given rooms to meet, or whether they were withheld that opportunity. So here, to illustrate that, the study, Simon and Schäfer, what we actually did, we asked our research participants to what extent they approved of what Christians, Jews, atheists, homosexuals, and feminists stand for, approved or disapproved of their lifestyle, of their practices, of their beliefs. And we asked to what extent they respect them as equal members of society. And what you can see here for all 5 groups, we observed the same pattern of relationships. That is, the more they respected members of that group as equal members of society, the more they showed tolerance. And of course, what we were most interested in is whether that pattern actually appeared when they disapproved of those groups. And you can see that very clearly. There's a very steep slope, so that means there's a strong relationship between respect and tolerance. And when they already approved of what those groups stood for or stand for, we observed the same relationship, but it was much weaker. But that actually is not relevant to us, because as soon as approval is in play, we are out of the realm of tolerance. I mean, tolerance then is not relevant here, because if you like something already or like somebody already, there's no need to show tolerance. And here is a graph or an illustration of the results of our longitudinal study, or one of our longitudinal studies, that is with the Tea Party supporters in the United States. And what you can see here is it's a complicated graph, but just focus on the green part. So what you can see is respect. We had actually 2 target groups. So our respondents were members of the Tea Party, but they were asked about their attitudes concerning homosexuals and Muslims. And what we can see here is that respect for homosexuals and respect for Muslims at time 1 predicted tolerance toward homosexuals, tolerance toward Muslims at time 2, about 5-6 months later. And since we control statistically tolerance at time 1, this relationship basically means that respect predicts the increase of tolerance over time. So I think this is rather strong evidence for the outgroup respect tolerance hypothesis, which is the key hypothesis of our disapproval respect model of tolerance. And I also want to show you one result from an experiment. What we did in this study is we asked students regarding their tolerance for a political outgroup, a conservative right-wing student group, very, very closely aligned, so we portrayed the information, with the right-wing extremist party in Germany, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, AfD. And we asked the students to what extent they would allow, were willing to allow, that student group to be active on campus. But before we asked them for their tolerance, we experimentally varied, experimentally manipulated their respect. So we had a control condition, or we had a condition in which we increased the respect. And that we were successful with that manipulation. As you can see here, this path from the experimental manipulation to the respect for the disapproved group. And I should say the group was always disapproved. We made sure of that. And then respect for the disapproved outgroup was strongly related with the tolerance toward the disapproved outgroup. Okay, for the next part of my talk, I convert the title actually of my talk into a question. So what are the prospects of tolerance, of such tolerance? I mean, tolerance as we understand it, tolerance according to our proposal of a hopefully compelling conception of tolerance. So what we should take into consideration when trying to answer this question is such a conception of tolerance, is it attractive? Is it attractive to the recipients of tolerance, and is it attractive to those people who should show such tolerance? We will also ask, what are the costs of that tolerance? What are the burdens involved in the practice of such tolerance for those who are tolerant, but also for those who are the recipients of such tolerance? So what burden does this conception of tolerance put on people's shoulders? I will also ask the question, is such a tolerance robust? And I actually will argue it is robust, though it's not indestructible. And therefore, I will also highlight in what way such a tolerance is vulnerable. So let me first turn to what I think makes, or to the gains, or what makes this conception of tolerance attractive. So, and then to what's demanding and what's robust and what are the vulnerabilities. Now, if tolerance is practiced in line with the model, tolerance is attractive to both the tolerated and the tolerant, because the recipients of such tolerance are able to live authentically despite others' disapproval of them. While the tolerant, those who practice such tolerance, are able to live authentically because they do not have to give up their disapproval. Now, however, the authenticity of one side comes with a burden for the other side, and vice versa. So the authenticity gain for the recipients puts specific burdens on the shoulders of the tolerant. And the authenticity that is possible via this form of tolerance, the authenticity of the tolerant puts specific burdens on the shoulders of the recipients of tolerance. That is, the burden for the tolerant is that it requires that the tolerant restrain their disapproval. So that's what they have to carry. That's what they have to put up with. That's, if you wish, what they have to tolerate. So they have to tolerate not the others, they have to tolerate their self-control. They have to bear their self-control, their self-restraint. The burden for the recipients is, such tolerance entails that they still have to put up with the unpleasant experience of continuing with restrained disapproval. So while the tolerant have to restrain themselves, and that's a demand I think should be acceptable to them, and we can expect of them to actually carry that burden. The burden for the recipients is that they will continue to be disapproved of, not being liked. But I don't think anybody has the entitlement to being liked, to being approved of. Or put it the other way around, nobody, I think, has the obligation to like other people. It's a nice thing, but I don't think we can ask that justifiably of other people, that they like us, that they approve of us. So the question, of course, here is, are these burdens in balance? And that, of course, needs to be negotiated and needs to be discussed. They need to be, in order for this model to work satisfactorily, they need to be fairly balanced. And that's, again, something we owe to each other as equals. So we do not owe each other to prevent each other from from burdens at all. But we owe each other that we are fair in distributing the burdens that we have to carry in if we want to live together with other people. Now, let's turn to the question of whether such a tolerance is actually robust. Here I would argue, I want to highlight that such tolerance is not unlimited tolerance in the sense of Popper, or at least in the sense of how Popper is often interpreted and understood, and I would say very often very superficially interpreted. So when Popper says unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance, I think he is right, but people very often misunderstand that as if he had said, well, I hope he hasn't said that actually, that tolerance, in order to defend itself, has to become intolerance at some point. Our model would not imply that. Our model, and I will show what that means, would argue that such an understanding of tolerance allows for a fortified and therefore a robust form of tolerance. So it is robust because the tolerant can identify and call it by its name and reject intolerance. And they can hold the intolerant accountable and they can even curb intolerance. And to the extent that those who reject and curb intolerance out of and with respect, they are not intolerant themselves. So what I'm saying here is we can have a fortified form of tolerance in that we can actually demarcate the line, red line, that the intolerant are not allowed to cross. But we do that not with intolerant means. We do it in a way that does not discredit the principle of our tolerance. And the principle of our tolerance is recognition as equals. Because equals you can hold accountable without actually becoming intolerant yourself. I use the example of the police. The police fights criminals, but hopefully without becoming criminals themselves. I mean, that's what the rule of law is for. We react to the violators of the law with the law and not with another violation of the law, hopefully. So this understanding of tolerance allows us to be very clear in fighting intolerance without discrediting our own principle. And I think it is a very dangerous thing to require that we should react to intolerant people with intolerance. I mean, what then is the difference? What is our superior justification, so to speak, compared to them? Only, and here I make a specification, but I'm very, very careful about that, only under exceptional circumstances. And here I think of John Rawls, it can be legitimate for the tolerant to be intolerant toward the intolerant. And Rawls specifies those exceptional conditions as the immediate danger to the equal liberties of others or considerable risks to our own legitimate interests. I think we have to be very, very careful with declaring this state of emergency. And my suspicion is that those who are all too willing to claim that we now have exceptional circumstances, they never took tolerance seriously to begin with. We have to realize that under those exceptional circumstances, we are no longer tolerant ourselves. Actually, we have suspended tolerance. And we need to return to reinstate tolerance as soon as possible. So we should be very careful, and I would rather erase this last paragraph from the slide, because it is very tempting for people to jump on that immediately. Oh, well, but this is an exceptional circumstance. I think we have to be very critical with others and with ourselves, whether we have a legitimate reason to declare such states of emergency. And we have, as I said in the first paragraph, we have very strong weapons to begin with to fight intolerance without discrediting ourselves and our tolerance principle as such. And I want to make I want to acknowledge that such tolerance is vulnerable, and it's vulnerable to attacks on level 2 identity as a source of respect across group boundaries, because that's the important restraining force, the important counterweight. So who destroys level 2 identity destroys the basis of respect and therefore the basis of tolerance. And who is it that attacks level 2 identity? I think here entrepreneurs of social division undermine level 1 or undermine level 2 identity. It is the entrepreneurs of level 1 identity that aspire actually to conquer level 2 identity. All those are attacks on level 2 identity. Either they try to tear it apart or they try to own it. So that they do not keep separate level 1 and level 2, but they rather claim that our level 1 identity is what actually should also be prototypical, so to speak, for level 2 identity. So those entrepreneurs, the entrepreneurs of social division of level 1 identity, they practically unleash level 1 identities. And then they risk that level 2 respect is not only burdened, but actually torn apart. So when people ask, what do we have to do in order to make tolerance possible in line with your conception of tolerance? My answer usually is, maybe there is not so much that you can actively do, but maybe there is more what you should not do. So do not undermine level 2 identity. Do not try to conquer with your level 1 identity, level 2 identity. So do not split level 2, because then you remove the counterweight, the restraining force. And be very wary of those entrepreneurs who try to seduce you in doing exactly that. Well, here maybe a selfish note. When respect is torn, it is not only the others, the outgroup on level 1, that suffer. We suffer as well. And here I take the liberty to quote myself. Like humanity more generally, respect is indivisible. Just as one's humanity is tethered to and mirrored in the humanity of others, so too is the respect for ourselves, so our self-respect, tethered to and mirrored in our respect for others. This insight is very important, and it actually comes from people who work on reconciliation processes. So the perpetrators and the victims, in a sense, they have to cooperate to repair their own and each other's humanity. And the perpetrators, they are dependent on the victims for forgiveness, for example, in order to reach, again, an integrity of their own human moral identity. So it's not just the victims of crimes, of genocide, that need the apology of the perpetrators. The perpetrators themselves, they need the forgiveness of the victim in order to repair their own image as a human being. And we know that from reconciliation research that for victims, it seems to be very important that their need for empowerment is fulfilled. Whereas for the perpetrators of crimes, for them it's very important that their moral image is being repaired. So they After all, they want to be recognized as a good person, as a good human being again. Now, then, all this probably comes down to the most critical question concerning the future prospects of such tolerance. That is, how deep is our respect for others? Is it strong enough? Is it strong enough that it might be burdened, but not torn apart? The question here is not, is it strong enough for us to value what they value? So respect is not about agreement, or agreeing, I should say, or that we converge in terms of what we value, that we accept what they value, that we basically value what they value, and that or that they value what we value. What is important here is the question, is it strong enough for us to register what they value, to see what they value, to have the sensitivity to register what they value, and then to take into consideration what they value, just as we take into consideration what we ourselves value. So what they value should be a factor in our equation of self-regulation, just as we take into consideration as a factor of what we value ourselves. Again, it's not that we should value the same thing, but we have to take into account what they value. And then we have to show equal concern for what they value. That is, we have to be concerned about how they are affected by certain measures, by certain acts, by certain behaviors of us. And we should be equally concerned about how they are affected as we are concerned about how we will be affected. And all that comes, that's our argument, from the recognition of the others as equals on level 2, that bridges the gap between in-group and out-group on level 1. So let me make clear, the purpose of respect, or the purpose of this concern, of equal concern, is not to celebrate our differences and our and other people's identities. It's not to celebrate, it's to tolerate. It's to abstain from disrespectful interference with these differences and identities, and to avoid offending or even repressing, without reasonable justification, what matters to them. And this is the end of my presentation after almost 45 minutes or 47 minutes. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'm now ready for discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your lecture. As I said at the very beginning, we really would like to have a vivid discussion during our conference. That's why I propose to give you, our dear participants, now a chance to ask questions to Professor Simon regarding his lecture, or share any of your reflections after the lecture. So please, now the floor is yours. If you have some questions, please just raise your hand so that our volunteers will be able to give you, or me to give you.
And if there are questions in Polish, I do have my translator here.
Yes. Well, I take the chance, firstly, to thank you, the organizers, for having us here. And you provided Professor, a quite challenging subject, especially for those of us who are not familiar with these processes. Until almost the end, I thought that you were presenting a pacifistic approach to the subject, but then you came with the claim that there is an urgent need sometimes to overcome this tolerance in order to protect at the end tolerance. And my question is, what is the justification of, what justifies justification in order to proceed on a process that will overcome the respect of tolerance in order to save on a future level this tolerance? Because at the end, there is no Catholic justification. All of us, we do not agree on the same thing. We cannot justify on the same way why do what we have to do or why we are doing what we are doing. So again, it's a group's decision to take the stance and justify its own actions against the others. So somewhere there, I'm missing it, or I think that there is a lack that does not really support at the end that respect can be approached on a Catholic level in society, respected by everyone, because at the end, our differences are so strong. And sometimes these differences it's important that they will be addressed heavily, especially in times of resistance. For example, during the Second World War in Greece, when we spoke about resistance, and many of the martyric communities struggle with that today, whether they had to resist to the Nazi occupation. And this resistance brought more suffering through massacres. Should they resist or should they not? Even the communities disagree on that level. So please help me a little bit more to understand what is the justification that justifies what we have to do at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for your question. And don't be offended now if I react critically. This is exactly what I said in the presentation. I don't understand. People jump on those exceptional conditions. And you just did it as well. Why do not we focus on the huge possibilities to act and react within the realm of tolerance? And we're not defenseless. We are strong and we can fight back, we can hold people responsible. Of course, if you switch then to these exceptional circumstances, you are in the zone of war. But even there, hopefully, there should be some restrictions. But the model, of course, tolerance, has been developed to deal with differences within our societies, within our communities. And of course, even with deviants in our community and criminals, but not. I could think how to apply it. When your country is attacked by another country, another nation, that probably would qualify as an exceptional circumstance in terms of John Rawls, But even then, I would say we should not give up the principle of respect easily. We should not torture even the prisoners of war. We should not humiliate them. Even here, the respect principle should be applied. So I cannot give you license to strike back without any restraint. That is not what the model provides for. Absolutely not.
Can I make a clarification?
Yes, but maybe just add one more thing, because I'm not a philosopher, so I'm not arguing we should respect. I do think we should, but I don't argue for that. I argue we can respect. I'm really convinced that social psychologically, we have the ability, almost the need, the urge to respect, because it's very difficult to deny the humanity of other people without violating our own humanity. And what I explained before, we have to be seduced by the entrepreneurs, by the propagandists, that they are not like us. And even then, we don't go away from those sites of conflict without the damage. So if soldiers who killed enemies, they have to deal with post-traumatic syndromes, because it's very difficult for them to deny the humanity of their victims, even if they are just sitting in a container and shooting drones, because they might not see their victims, but they know, and they haunt them in their dreams. So, and maybe in a very conceited, pretentious way, I spoke in one of the papers that we have something like a social categorical imperative, which is very similar to, and that's the conceited part, to Kant's social categorical imperative. What I mean with the social categorical is, by the very fact that we as human beings are able to categorize on different levels of abstraction and social inclusion, respect is a kind of natural thing for us that we have to suppress in order to act against it. So that's the optimistic part of my social psychology approach. I do think so the practical, the ought implies the practical can in terms of Kant. And I think what social psychology can teach us, we can. And so therefore, to ask that we ought is not asking too much. So, but you had an addition.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if I'm allowed. I actually, myself, I speak from a pacifistic approach. I have to make it clear. Mm-hmm. It may sound differently, but this is my own approach. But because we said that we have to address challenging issues here, and because we cannot imply our own views to the rest of the society, and the society is divided right now, how to interpret our times, how critical these times are times of war, are times pre-war time. So different groups have different understanding, and they have different approaches on how to deal with groups in society that they consider them to be threatening elements to peace, solidarity, brotherhood among humanity. So this is why I made this comment, because exactly because we do not have a specific common understanding how to read this crucial moment in history right now. And we see people having a variety of different, not just approaches and ideas, but taking actions of violence, again, in the name of preserving peace. Who is at the end the one who is going to say whether this is a time to overcome respect in order to regain it on a future level, or we should still wait?
I don't like the wording overcome respect. I think if we violate it, well, that might and will happen, and then we have to try to get back as soon as possible. But I'm not a pacifist anymore. But I still believe that we're dealing, when we're dealing with enemies, we're dealing with human beings, and we owe something to them. And this basic respect is something we owe to them, and if we fail, then we have failed. And then we should not defend our failure. We should admit our failure and try not to do it again. But when there are certain moments in history where we have no way out innocently, that's very bad. But don't not you, but let's not try to find bogus justifications for it. And I do believe I'm not a relativist. I do believe in reason, and I do believe in something like principles no one, to quote Tim Scanlon, no one can reasonably reject. I do strongly believe in that, but that doesn't mean that there aren't bloody disagreements. But what I'm arguing here for is to avoid bloody to turn disagreements into bloody disagreements, but try to keep it as long as possible to respectful disagreements. There's much more to say, but I see that many other people have questions.
Thank you for the lecture. I have one question, actually. How frequent is respect? How many people, in fact, expressed respect in the way you identify that? Because when you say that respect comes from these superordinate identities, what we know about superordinate identities is that, in fact, when people focus on them, they are actually becoming less, not more tolerant, right? For example, when Germans think about their European identity, they suddenly start thinking about Polish people as being not equally European, or other people as being less prototypical Europeans, as we know from in-group projection model, for example, right? So it's a quite automatic process, this intergroup differentiation, which leads us to also, when we use these subordinate categories, not to include the outgroup members into these categories, but rather treat them as suboptimal members of these categories. Therefore, I was wondering whether in those studies, most people were basically declaring their respect, but are there any unobtrusive measure to check whether they really respect, or whether they just declare that? That's the question.
I mean, first I take their word for it. What does it mean, really respect? I mean, if they show tolerance and it relates to their declaration of respect, that's pretty much enough for us. So I wouldn't see a need to go deeper and say, oh, they don't really mean it, they just fake it. So when you said something about how often is respect there, I would say it's always there. The problem is that people try to break it, but it's a counterforce. I mean, they have to try to break it because it's there. You don't have to generate it. It's there. It's so to speak, an uphill battle. And they're successful. They're trying hard, but they are trying hard. They have to try hard. So that's my optimism behind this. I think it's the very fact that they have to argue, that they have to say they are not human beings. They might look like us, but they're really like lice. They're really like parasites. So you have to convince the people, when you're a propagandist, that they are not like us. And that's a hard and a permanent job. And unfortunately, it's not always unsuccessful, but it has to be done again and again, over again. And for me, that's the good sign that respect is a counterforce that is, so to speak, in our brains, given our ability as human beings to categorize, not just on level 1, but also on higher levels. And in a sense, each level 1 identity is almost by logical necessity embedded in a more abstract common identity, superordinate, so to speak, level 2 identity. And what the propagandists have to do, they have to cut this bond. They have to destroy it, but they have to destroy it because it's there and it grows up again when they do not destroy it again and again and again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
All right. I'm very attracted to your project. I think tolerance is a virtue that needs to be rehabilitated. I have a question in two parts, if you'll just bear with me. But your talk reminded me a little over 2 decades ago when I was a PhD student at Edinburgh University. I was asked to defend in a debate the principle of tolerance in the aftermath of 9/11. And I think I was chosen to defend tolerance because I was seen as the most centrist of my peer group. And what I was surprised by was the hostility to tolerance of the audience that came to watch the debate, which was predominantly, not far left, but sort of a centre-left kind of audience. And what I wanted to do is just put to you some of the things they said to me, which I'm sure are things that you've heard before, but are probably worth responding to. So the first question, if you like, that I have is, you didn't really talk about power at all. Obviously, it's implied if you have a tolerant party and a tolerated party, there's a power relationship implied by that. And usually in multicultural liberal democracies, we're talking about a majority tolerating a minority of some sort. This was put to me as an unacceptable principle by which a society should organize. It was critiqued as patriarchal. And the alternative value that was put forward was acceptance, which I noticed was actually on a very early slide that you had here. I won't go into what I said in response. I'd be more interested to hear what you have to say. The second part is that when you were talking about boundaries as a sign of respect, you reminded me of the Robert Frost poem, Mending Wall, in which he says, good fences make good neighbors. You get along with your neighbors quite well when you've got a fence. You can draw boundaries, etc. But of course, you talk to your neighbors and you find common cause with your neighbors when you need to, etc. I just wondered if the question I had was really related to the prospects for tolerance in the 21st century, which might be the prospects for tolerance in an age of social media, for example. How do you talk across boundaries when boundaries themselves are being collapsed? Is there a language is there a dialogue, if you like, or a language, an etiquette, perhaps, in how we need to talk across boundaries with those that we disapprove of, that needs to be recovered, rehabilitated, in fact. So yeah, 2 questions. One on the power dynamics that tolerance suggests or imply, how you respond to that, and the second on dialogue across boundaries.
Okay, thank you. What I think is important about about our conception of tolerance to realize is that it doesn't ask people to give up their disapproval. That is a very, I think, very important point, because by that it's easier for them to show respect. If they confuse respect with approval, respect becomes almost an impossible thing to do. So by disentangling, and that's my experience also when I present this model in the general public, not to experts, very often they have a moment of relief by saying, oh, now I see, I do not have to give up my disapproval in order to respect them. So it's a win-win situation in that respect. So they can keep their disapproval, even if it's irrational, even if it's prejudice, even if it's stereotype-based. I would say that's fine, as long as it's restrained, controlled by respect. Then you raised the issue of power. Yes, it's not explicitly in it. It's implicitly in it, but I would say in a different way than you suggested. The tolerant and tolerated are not necessarily, that's not necessarily correlated in a simple way with power. Even at the societal level, the powerless they can be very intolerant in their smaller microcosm. But it's implicated in the understanding of respect as equality recognition. And that's why this conception of tolerance is disliked by the progressivists and by the reactionaries. Because the reactionaries, they do not want to give respect that means equality recognition, because that would imply power sharing, giving up some of your power. And the progressivists, very often, they do not want to accept that the idea that disapproval can stay there without being removed. Your point about borders, that's, I think, also a very important point. It has to do with our understanding of human beings as social beings. Being social, our sociality means that we entertain relationships with people that are other people. And so necessarily there is a gap, there is a border, there's a limit, there's a difference, necessarily. So now, when losing borders would mean, and I fear it could mean, that we are losing our sociality, our character as social beings, because we think we are alone in the world. Other people are just like trees for us, with whom we do not entertain relationships. That is probably my greatest fear. So I'm not so much afraid of borders and gaps and differences, because they can be bridged by higher level respect. But when we've reached a point of being, I would call it post-social, not asocial, post-social, where we are unable to entertain social relations that by definition are with others rather than with ourselves, then I think we are in deep trouble. Oh, sorry. Because he was trying already in half an hour.
Can you hear me? Okay.
To get the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you again for your lecture. I think during your presentation you mentioned that nobody is entitled to be liked or to be approved by others. I really liked the distinction that you did between being liked or approved and being respected. I had never heard this kind of approach about respect in such a way. That was very, very good, because growing up, I used to listen, to hear all the time that respect has to be earned. So hearing respect here in a different way, it was very edifying, especially when you make the correlations or connections between respect and humanity. And I don't know if I'm mistaken here, but I was thinking this, like, if you're humane only to people who treat you with humaneness, only to those kind of people, how humane are you? So this line of thought made me think, if respect is something that must be given to everybody, why is it so difficult to give it to criminals, for example? Because it seems to me that they deserve that respect too, because of the humanity that we share. Why is it so challenging to do that? And also, how can we solve or make baby steps to solve that issue? Because just by making that distinction between who deserves to be respected and who doesn't, we're in some ways denying the humanity of the other.
Okay. now your last remark concerning babies made me feel guilty, because I do think babies deserve to be liked. And children deserve to be liked by their parents. And spouses deserve to be liked by their spouses. But that's something, you know, you can't really demand it. And I think in parents, I mean, they owe care. They owe that they care for their children. I wouldn't force people to have feelings. I mean, it's a very nice thing when it happens, and I hope it happens. But that's, from a psychological point, I think, kind of a difficult situation if you demand that somebody likes you. But respect, fairness, justice, that's something we owe to each other. And therefore, we are entitled to ask for it, and we are obligated to give it. And it comes from, again, I would say, from the fact that, as you indicated, it's not deserved, it's by the very fact of being, not of doing, of being a member of that category. And in the final analysis, being a member of the human category. And of course, there's a voluminous body of literature about respect and different understandings of respect. For example, Stephen Darwell wrote a very, very important paper on two different kinds of respects in 1977, I think, where he differentiated between appraisal respect and recognition respect. I found the idea very important, but the terminology I thought could be misleading. So I liked much more I find it more helpful in the differentiation that Alex Honneth makes between esteem and respect. So esteem has to do with achievement recognition. You recognize what somebody has achieved. So like when you're a good tennis player, then you achieved a certain status and esteem. But as a human being, you don't have to earn it. You cannot be more or less human on the basis of merit, for example, and you touched upon that point as well, the reciprocity doesn't work here. So you treat me in an inhumane way, so now I'm justified to pay back the same way. Morally speaking, I'm not a moral philosopher, but I know most philosophers, I assume, would say reciprocity doesn't work for basic moral equality. And I mean, if you're in Kantian, it certainly doesn't work, because it has to do with the universalization principle. So I understand that we basically agreed that concept of respect is a valuable concept in and of itself and should not be conflated with neighboring concepts like liking, disapproval, or appraisal.
Hi, thanks again for the lecture. So I will give the note to my question that I'm not a social psychologist, and so all of this is a little new to me. I agree that the concept of respect, as you laid it out, and its relationship with tolerance is certainly an ideal to strive towards. As a historian, though, I want to come back to the question of power dynamics, because it seems to me that the arrangement or the what's the word I'm looking for? The arrangement that you showed kind of assumes equal playing field, but that's not, like, we don't operate in an equal playing field. And so certainly, ideally, we should all have respect for each other as individuals, as members of other identities. But for example, I'm coming from the United States, where for hundreds of years, white lawmakers didn't have to respect the humanity or the basic rights of African Americans or other non-white people. In this situation, it didn't really matter if these people of color respected or tolerated the tolerators or not. I'm just trying to hope that maybe you could speak a little bit about the real world applicability of this type of model that would incorporate some of the realities of these power dynamics, because not everyone has to respect each other. Those, again, we should, right? But those with much more power, it does not matter if they choose to respect someone else if they have the authority to create systems that only benefit themselves.
Well, in a sense, you could say, probably this is a Habermasian term, it's a counterfactual force, though. People appeal to their entitlement to respect by forming social movements to change the power structure. And the powerful have to come up with excuses why those who demand a change are not equals. And for me, that shows that we're not living in heaven yet, yes, but on the horizon, there is a very strong argument for equality as a force, a powerful force against the existent power structure. So that's what we have to tap, yeah, and not here, I come again, not to destroy this, I would almost call it a natural respect tendency, inclination in all of us, even the powerful. And that's why they have to come up with excuses. What they say usually is, well, we treat things equally when people are equal. Like gay marriage is not the same as heterosexual marriage. So that's the conservative argument very often. You can't treat different things equally. That's a cop-out, and I think we have to argue against that. And I think they cannot make that argument easily and for a long time, because I think they go against the tide of this kind of natural respect feeling that unless it's suppressed, it's working.
Okay, and following up on the last question, this is on, right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this in terms of being in a democracy or in an autocracy. So I think that what you just explained is a process that can happen in a democratic process where people are fundamentally free to voluntarily come to the idea of respect or tolerance. But what about in an autocratic system around the world today, or let's say 80 years ago under Nazi occupation, where tolerance is either forced amongst different groups perhaps, they want everyone to get along, or intolerance is also enforced and you don't really have the freedom to come to this idea of tolerance yourself? How would you say that a political, just democratic versus autocratic system plays into your model and the possibilities of tolerance?
Autocratic systems are systems that systematically destroy level 2. They systematically undermine it. They systematically deny that there is level 2. And then the people in autocratic systems that try to overthrow it, they appeal, no, there is a level 2. We, the people. So I do think it's a subversive force even in autocratic systems. But of course, when you have tanks and you roll with tanks over people, well, you can't do much against that. That's, by the way, that's not a power relationship, as we know from Foucault, when people are in chains, there's no relation of power. But when you try to bend them rather than to break them, then there's a power relationship. And those even those power relationships only work, I would argue, by appealing to a higher order level of identity. Even if in those systems, they say, look, after all, we are all Germans or Poles, and by tapping that source of equality, they use it as a mobilization instrument, so to speak, even then for very anti-democratic agendas. But that is ideology, and that needs to be exposed. And for that, we have to keep it alive, this idea of respect as equals that we owe to each other, no matter what.
Hello.
Challenging to me, to my values, because I agreed with a lot with what you said, but it's opposite at the same time. Because for me, tolerance, inherent in it is the idea that there's something wrong with the other. I don't want to be tolerated. You know, toleration is saying there's something wrong with the other, but you have to make an effort to like him. I want to be liked. I want to be loved, you know? And I don't think that's unreasonable. Because if it's the unconditional love thing, if you think everyone is a human being, then you are intolerant to anyone who breaks the law, intolerant to injustice, but inclusion. For me, I prefer inclusion rather than tolerance. I mean, I want people to give up their disapproval, because if you do not give up your disapproval, what are we not accepting in disapproval? I mean, if you go with rule of law and human justice, United Nations human rights, and so on, people who disapprove of them need to get rid of that disapproval. I mean, I don't know. I apologize if I misunderstood the message in your... I mean, a lot of things you said were okay, but this idea of tolerance, I don't like it at all. I mean, because people are complex. So I'm a Catholic. Yeah. So if you don't like Catholics, why are you looking at me as a Catholic? That's a small part. I'm a good cook as well. I'm a mother. I'm a lecturer. I'm a professor. I'm a, you know. So that's what the message should be, I think, to people. Don't tolerate Eugene because she's a Catholic, but you have to tolerate her. Tolerate her because Eugene is a human being. So she should be included. And yes, you have to like her. Because you will have to, if you don't like other people, then you can't respect them, you can't look at them as other human beings. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, in many respects, we're talking past each other because we have different conceptions, and I probably failed then to argue very clearly for my conception. And the conception is an offer, a proposal, and it's a rival to your conception. And all I ask, I don't want to sell it. I'm not a salesman here. All I ask for is take it seriously, think it through seriously, and you might be surprised maybe that you might find yourself thinking maybe similarly after all. But that's not a guarantee, and I could be wrong. But I think actually I wasn't serious when I said I don't make, I think I made it clearly. I thought I made it very clear, but I can make it clearer too. I mean, the point is disapproval. It would be nice if it, well, one could say it would be nice if it goes away, dislike. I'm not quite sure whether we all should be melted into one and no differentiation, no borders. And inclusion doesn't mean that the disagreements go away. Include others as different equals. Why the hell do you want to be everybody be the same and like each other? I mean, so different equal has resources that you lose otherwise. And I mean, do you really want to be in a society where everybody just gives you a like, whatever you say? I mean, not even a dislike anymore, not even differentiating shades of liking. I think that we would run into a lot of problems with this very, I mean, a gentle and on the surface likable approach. But I think it's not very realistic as a big starting point. Where we end? Well, that's open. I don't know the future. But I think we have to start with it. And that's when I said in the beginning, I do think the tolerance is necessary and it's demanding. It's not everything, but without tolerance, everything is nothing. We might not even be able to discover that we like each other if we do not accept it for the beginning. It's like in therapy. You have to accept your weaknesses before you do them away. You have to then work with it and in a productive way overcome it. So, by the way, I don't want to be celebrated. It's enough if I'm respected.
Okay, and now the last question, please.
Hello, Prof.
Hello.
You talked about to tolerate stemming from respect. And then you talked about power dynamics and having a higher, pretty much, goal. We are all human. We are all these other different things that people give up or give in or show that actually people rely on. But I'm looking at it in terms of even those who claim that you should tolerate them, mostly those in power, because they're doing something actually wrong to you, taking away some of your power. And that can also be seen in history. Talk about the continent of Africa and the continent of Europe. It can be seen in not even long time ago in modern day history. Talk about the economics. We can also talk about COVID just the other day with the vaccination. If we went back a few years ago, we can talk about many, many things. Technology transfer. There are many things that people have, for many years, looked at others as non-human. But in the countries where probably these people are, they'll consider themselves democratic, but also they'll claim to be tolerant, yet in other aspects, they pretty much trample on those rights and all these other things. And my question goes to you. Back to the power dynamics. Back to the power dynamics. Back to the power dynamics. How does one become tolerant in one aspect and yet become intolerant in the other aspect?
Okay. Again, I suggested a certain conception of tolerance. Now, if I'm confronted with other conceptions or people using the word tolerance, but in the back of their mind, they have other conceptions of tolerance, I am not responsible for that. So what I'm saying here is, and actually a consequence is that, and I say that in the paper, there's a difference between tolerance and toleration. Not to tolerate terrorism is not intolerance, as long as you're still guided by the principle of respect. That is, you don't torture, you don't humiliate. So toleration and tolerance are two different things. It's like I said before with the police. The police do not tolerate crime, but they do not become themselves criminals, hopefully. So Maybe the problem is that we use the same words without putting our respective conceptions of those words or concepts on the table. So I try to do that, and I want to be measured relative to my conception, and I'm not, so to speak, responsible for other people's conceptions of tolerance. And Rainer Forst, in his book, he makes a very important synopsis, so to speak, of different understandings, like the permission conception of tolerance, the coexistence conception of tolerance, and then the respect conception of tolerance on which we build our model. So, and that's what I've been talking here about. And therefore, to tolerate a dictatorship, that is not what is demanded by the kind of tolerance conception that I was trying to explain here. On the contrary, dictatorship who denies respect to the people, they have to be curbed. But again, I would argue, as long as we don't want to end up with civil war, we should be careful in choosing our means.
Okay. Thank you very much once again, Professor, for
Thank you very much.
Extremely interesting and stimulating lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your questions, and I'm sorry not all of you managed to ask your question. I'm sorry. Before we invite you to a coffee break, I have two important information. On your ID conference badges, there is a QR code. By scanning it, you gain access to a ThinkLink platform where you can find more voices of survivors. You can find the full conference program, all speakers' bios, as well as descriptions of all conference sessions and panels. So this is information number one. And information number two is related already to tomorrow, because in the front of the main entrance to our conference room, there are whiteboards with forms. Yes, we can see the forms on the screen. And on the forms, you should declare your participation in 3 of 6 of tomorrow's session, discussion, within the session educational work in modern diverse communities. And what is important, this session is divided into 3 time slots. So please write your name under 3 of the projects you are the most interested in, and what is important in 3 different time slots. And now we are starting our coffee break. Hot and cold drinks as well as snacks are served on levels 0 and -1. And at 3:30 we will meet here again and we will start our first panel discussion. So see you soon.